we work with three of the five largest banks in the world use us for
Right.
conversational AI, right? And like all the big players have some kind of Rasa in there. And that typically goes because someone, without asking anyone for permission, starts building something with Rasa and
Right.
starts showing like, hey, wait, we can do this. Like one technical pillar has really been solved to deliver that level 5 AI. Like if you can do all the context engineering, this is the shortest version of the talk. If you can do all the context engineering, then like frontier models now are smart enough to do that personalization in real time for the right user. But how on earth, if you're a large enterprise, with 200,000 employees and all these different departments and everything
Yeah.
else, are you going to build a system that can do context engineering at that scale for that level of user and that
Right.
level of personalization? The area of difficulty has shifted, and we have something that makes it a lot more possible. And the difference as well is like the belief is there. At the
Right.
C level, the belief is there. We saw this new crop of language models come out in the last couple of years. And we said, okay, well, we have a new breed of models that can do qualitatively different things that we couldn't do before.
Hmm.
And we have a very good understanding of the kinds of things that our customers want to build because, we've got some pedigree and we've got some very big customers running us in production. We know the kinds of things they want to do and we know what's been hard for the last 6 or 7 years. We said, can we just forget everything we know and just redesign from the ground up and then see what drops out of it, right? What can we work backwards? So we started with just a huge list of essentially test cases of like types of conversations that we knew people wanted to be able to build.
Right.
We said, can we build a small set of abstractions that lets us solve every single one of these problems?
Hey, Alan. Thanks so much for joining us today on Bluejay Podcast, which we're calling actually Skywatch. No pun intended, but meant to bring a bird's eye view, so to speak, on
My goodness.
on the idea of this like space of voice and conversational AI as it's kind of been taking off. I'm super super excited to have the chance to speak with you today. Um, Ross is obviously a big name in conversational AI, but would love to kind of just hear it directly from you as to like a little bit about the company, what it does, and how it got started.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rohan, for inviting me on and having a
Yeah,
chat. Sorry we couldn't hang out in person and do this in the car this time, but
yeah.
next time we can do a follow-up
Next
episode.
time for sure.
But yeah, so I'm Alan, co-founder of Rasa. Um, I like to say I've been doing chatbots since before they were any good, and founded the company in 2016,
Mhm.
and was actually working on search. So I was building a search engine with my co-founder, and then we had a product, and it was kind of not really going anywhere, and we shut it down, and got interested in multi-turn conversation because we were like building these things that you could connect via Slack. That was the sort of the cool chatbot platform at the time. You could build these
Mhm.
little automations and apps for yourself, right? And so we were building these little Slack apps and realized that the real challenge is that, well, actually, how do you have a whole conversation with follow-up questions and all this rich, interesting stuff. And it's funny now because, of course, in the last couple of years, RAG is such a big thing. RAG is now the starting point for conversational AI when people are looking at building an application. So kind of, search became chat and then chat became search again. So it all just, goes in a circle forever. But, we were looking around. I mean, we were devs building a bunch of things and just looked around at what was there. And there were all these APIs and there were a couple frameworks for devs to use. Um, but all really kind of there for like hello world type applications. And they were all, they all look great, right? For kind of, single turn interactions or like very simple applications. And we said, you know, wouldn't it be great if somebody built, something that was, okay, you've done that, now you want to do it for real, right? What's the framework you really want to do?
Right.
You really want to use now that you know what you're doing. And honestly, that was, almost 10 years ago now. And I would say that is still the truth about Rasa today. Like, people rarely start with Rasa as their first conversational AI platform. It is
Go-
exceedingly rare, right? People come to Rasa when they've used one of those like purely UI-based platforms for a while. They've been
Gotcha.
doing that for a couple of years, and then they've run out of road, and they're like, "Can't do what I need. I'm stuck like putting duct tape on the system, building
Right.
workarounds. Actually, I need something that is, a piece of infrastructure that I can integrate and I can build upon, and I can sort of build my own automations around and everything else." Now I get it.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so that's still the role that we play. I mean, I think one of the things we've been trying to address from a product perspective is like, how do we really like lower the learning curve for Rasa? because
Right.
we do have, I mean, as you say, we have a name, we have a reputation.
Hmm.
Um, I think we have some credibility, but we also have a bit of a reputation maybe for being a bit intimidating as a platform or a bit hardcore,
Hmm.
right? So, I mean, we can get into that and talk about
Yeah.
what we've been doing there and show some product stuff and everything.
Yeah.
That's obviously been a big, effort
Mhm.
for
Right.
us. And then something, we should talk about in this conversation today as well, sort of the evolution of voice
Yeah.
over the last few years, and especially in the enterprise and how they think about it and everything else. So
100%. No, I
we've
think
seen a lot of that.
yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And we're definitely gonna kind of dive deeper into Rasa and like, some of the challenges you guys solve and like what makes you guys unique. But before I even do that, I'm kind of just interested because you guys started so early, like in
Mm.
2016, before all of the AI hype was there. And I'm
I
not gonna
mean,
lie, I in preparing for this, I ran like a deep research into Rasa and your background, and what was really
I'm curious
interesting
what
for
it came
me.
up with.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. I always like when it came up with the stuff, I was like, is that really true? And then I did like a Google search and I was like, okay, let me make sure it's actually true
Hmm.
before I ask you about it.
All
But
the
there's
bad stuff is false. Those are all
all the bad stuff
hallucinations.
as well. That yeah, that's what I like to say as well. On the my question is like you guys started so early and your background's really
Mm.
interesting because I found out you were doing actually molecular simulations before and you kind of
Yeah,
had like a PhD in physics as well. So I'm really
yeah.
curious like what what caused the pivot from your interests into, conversational AI, and like since you were starting so early, like how did you kind of fall into that space? And what gave you kind of the conviction that hey, this was
Mm.
the right area to tackle?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of a personal story there, but also I think, some history, like a little history lesson for folks
We've got some
who
time. We'd
are
love to
who
hear
are
it.
new, right? So I mean, yeah, my journey was, I was obviously trained in physics, and then my PhD was in physics, but I was doing a lot of machine learning
Uh-huh.
applied to physics, and that sort of caught my interest. And I think this happens to a lot of people. You get more interested in the methods that you're developing than you are in actually the application you're using them for, right? So you kind of get down the rabbit hole. And so, um, this was around the time that neural nets really started working, right? So Google had this first paper where they showed that they trained this big neural net on an image recognition data set, and that they could identify one neuron that fired when there was a cat in the photo. And this
Hmm.
was the first time people started to really believe that there was such a thing as, like, there was always this hypothesis that you would have these neural networks and they'd have like higher level, more abstract representations at different layers, but there was no evidence that that was actually happening. And then you started to get this evidence that, like, hey, these things are really starting to work at just for classification problems, right? It was all you
Right.
could do. There was no generation at the time.
Yeah.
And all the generative model stuff that was all very interesting was all about sort of generating continuous distributions and mixture models and all this kind of stuff. Um, but so obviously, there was something there on the neural network side, um, but there was no transformer, there was no BERT, right?
Right.
There was very little of anything that we
Hmm.
think of as like
Yeah.
totally standard now. Um, but got interested in search purely just out of interest in like productivity and building startups. And the search product we built was essentially like if you have the Spotlight search on your Mac, and we built that for the browser, and it just searched like across all your stuff
I see.
online, right? And then we realized that it was kind of like, I guess, a prehistoric version of Glean, maybe, is like what we were building, right?
So
And
yeah.
RAG without the G, right? So, so we were, but yeah, that's sort of the space we were in. And then we were sort of exposing some of these things through Slack. And then we had built some stuff that we were, uh, we had some paying customers for, and they were using these Slack bots, and then they were engaging with it in this real like multi-turn way. They were asking
Right.
follow-on questions. They weren't asking like well-scoped individual questions that you could like parse and turn into a query or do something with, right? So we got
Right.
really interested in that. How do you have a real conversation thing? And then I
Mhm.
actually found out, and I didn't know this at the time. I'd already left the PhD. I was like, fully doing startup stuff. And then I realized that in the building where I used to be working, in like the
Mhm.
floor above the floor where I sat in the lab and did my PhD, there were a whole bunch of people who had done all this interesting work, and there was sort of decades of research on dialogue systems and spoken dialogue systems and how to
Right.
make those work. And at the time, the very in vogue thing was building like Bayesian models over like what's the probability of what this person is looking for. So you would have a very simple task like, finding like recommending a restaurant to a user. And
Right.
you had to deal with like this very high error rate in the speech recognition, very high error rates in the like language understanding. And so just you're gathering these like small pieces of evidence from this very noisy signal and like, do I at this point in the conversation have confidence that the person is looking for like a restaurant with these attributes and can I
Right.
complete this task in some meaningful way, right? So there was a lot of really sophisticated stuff that happened there.
Hmm.
Um, and anyway, so there was just this huge body of research on like how to build smarter spoken dialogue systems. And then we looked at like what we were doing as devs and what everyone else was doing as developers. And we're like
Hmm.
that there's an opportunity here, right? To sort of take some of these ideas and put them in a library that actually, developers can use. So that was sort
Right.
of innocently what we were thinking about. And then there was the chatbot hype, right? So there was
Right.
a huge wave of chatbot hype in 2016, and it was
Hmm.
the usual suspects, right? It was Zuckerberg and Nadella telling
Uh-huh.
everyone that chatbots are the new cool thing, they're the new apps,
Right.
it's the
Uh-huh.
next big thing, right? Um, and there was this huge wave of excitement around, building these kinds of things. And of
Hmm.
course, the technology was very rudimentary, right? And not
Hmm.
nearly as powerful as what we can do now. And you had to like
Right.
kind of anticipate all the paths, all the things that users could say, all the
Uh-huh.
paths that they could take. And so, it was always very brittle, and it was like a long journey towards building, something that was a bit more robust that wouldn't break all the time, right? And the big challenge at the time was, okay, you have like a happy path, they're going to push the user down. And like, can I build something that doesn't totally bonk if users stray from the happy path in any
Mhm.
way, right? And that was sort of the big challenge at the time. Now we kind of take that for given as a
Right.
given, and we say, well, how do we make sure that it's not too accommodating, it doesn't go off the rails too much, and like
Yeah.
doesn't go and be helpful and like offer recipes or whatever other
Yeah.
stuff, right?
I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious. Do you have any funny stories from, building some of these like early chatbots in terms of, how they performed or behaved that you can like recall and share with us?
I mean, the one that was like went really viral. I mean, now you get all these ones that where the things
Right.
hallucinate and they go viral, right? But there
Yeah.
was one from PayPal, right?
Uh-huh.
Who's actually they're one of our investors, so I hope they won't be too offended. But there was this example that went viral where somebody messaged the PayPal chatbot and they said, "I got scammed," and it
Uh-huh.
replied, "Great," and then like I don't know whatever else came afterwards. But
Gotcha.
yeah, I mean, there were plenty of like horrendous non sequiturs at the time,
Right.
right? And I mean,
Uh-huh.
even something like negation was
Right.
really difficult. That was a really difficult problem.
Uh-huh.
Um, and or like parsing a compound entity, right? Even like a
Right.
trivial, like a pizza example, saying, I want like a medium pepperoni pizza and a Hawaiian pizza. Oh, a large one, right?
Uh-huh.
Like if that's a spoken, not entirely fluent utterance on the phone, making sure that
Gotcha.
you match up the sizes and the toppings correctly and like group all those things in a robust way. Like those kind of, again, stuff that's totally trivial now
Right.
with LLMs, right? And things that we used to think about solving, like a problem that we actually we thought about and we talked about for a while was, can we build a little model that just sits and takes your like canned chatbot responses and just
Hmm.
rephrases them slightly to sound a little more contextual, right? So if
Interesting.
someone says like, "Hey, can you order me a pizza?" That instead of just saying, "I'm sorry, I can't help with that," you say like, "I love pizza too. Sorry, I don't do that kind of thing." Right? Just acknowledging that you understood what the user asked for, like improve
Right.
the UX a little bit. And pre LLMs and in context learning and just doing everything via prompts, you think about,
Hmm.
okay, how do I train a model to do that? What does
Right.
my training data look like? What do my
Yeah.
evals look like?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, right? And we started sort
Mhm.
of thinking about the project, and it just ballooned, and it became so complicated. We're like, for this little bit of value, like
Mhm.
it's not doable, right? And then you've only
Uh-huh.
covered one language, and goodness knows what else it's going to do. And at the time, we talked about it internally. We said like, what's the timeline before enterprises are going to be comfortable sending like text that they didn't pre-approve, that's
Right.
been generated by a model,
Uh-huh.
that they're going to send that to their end users, and we're like, oh, that's 10 years away. Like
Yeah.
that for enterprises to be confident doing that, that's so far away. That's
Right.
everything they're doing right now is sort of, how do we rein in the complexity, how do we do AI but guarantee that it never does anything wrong. kind of
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
Um, and another sort of thing that is maybe a misconception that hasn't disappeared
Uh-huh.
is this idea of like self-learning.
Yeah.
So I don't know where it really comes from, but there's a popular perception that if you deploy an AI, it should be just be getting better all the time by
Hmm.
virtue of interacting with people,
With it.
right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
don't ask the question of like where the signal is coming from, about what is learning from those interactions. But um, that was true then, and that's still true now. I think that there's often a conception that these things will just you put them out and they will just simply improve by virtue of getting more experience and talking to people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting. I think self-learning as a concept, I think is, definitely something that's been getting a lot of buzz right now, but it's also super cool to hear that, hey, it was still also back in 2016, a big topic as well. I'm
Yeah,
kind of curious, like, how complex was your first conversational bot that you built? Maybe if it was even
Mm,
like pre-Rasa. I think you mentioned something, something embedded within Slack that you were working on. Was that kind of the first conversational bot that you guys worked on or that you personally did? Kind of take me through that process. What were like the
yeah,
major problems that you saw then? And are those still relevant today or is it somewhat different?
yeah, yeah. So one of the projects, one of the products that we built and we're selling to companies,
Hmm.
was actually English to SQL, which is
Okay.
definitely like a whole category of products now, right?
Yeah.
And what we did was we sold this to marketing teams, so they had like a little data analyst as a Slack bot that they could talk to. So a
Right.
marketing team could go in and they could say, uh, you know, show me how much I'm spending on Facebook ads, or you could say, show all my campaigns on social media by country, right? Or you could say something really sophisticated, right? Like show me the ROI on all my campaigns on Twitter by country for the last 2 weeks.
Hmm.
And then, we would turn that into a query and then we would show you some results.
Hmm.
And very quickly realize that nobody talks like that. And
Yeah.
definitely marketing teams don't talk like that. And if people talk like that, they could just write a query themselves. Because if they
Right.
articulated the point that clearly, then that was already the hard part. And so people would talk to this thing and they would say, how's Facebook?
Uh-huh.
Right? Or how's my Twitter performing? Or something like that. Or
Right.
are we spending in Germany? Or like just, obviously you get into this sense of end user behavior that looks a lot different from what you anticipated. And that was, for many years, uh, is something I would evangelize very vocally is like you need to get your thing out there and see how real users interact with it because you
Exactly.
cannot sit in a vacuum and anticipate how users behave.
Hmm.
You will just get it wrong every time, right? So you need
Yeah.
to like deploy this thing, and
Right.
especially in the days where these models didn't know so much about the world,
Right.
sort of before you gave them any training data, before you did any annotation,
Uh-huh.
you really had this like horrendous cold start problem.
Right.
And so, you try and bootstrap it with some synthetic data, but it never
Right.
really worked super well. But that was an interesting problem. And the big difference then is at the time we were doing the English to SQL, and now of course you think, okay, well, I read it these prompts. At the time we had to train a model like per table,
Right.
right? So like
Wow.
every time someone came in with a new schema, we had to train a new model to like be able to do that translation, right? Which again,
Yeah.
like now seems obviously uh
Uh-huh.
barbaric, but that was that
Yeah.
was that was the best we could do.
Interesting.
And it was pretty futuristic at the time, right? But
Yeah.
we gave up on the product because we said this is
Okay.
not actually a standalone product. This will just be a feature
One off.
add-on
Yeah.
of any like BI platform.
Right.
And I think now that's true. I mean, 10 years later now that has become true when it
Uh-huh.
became easier to build it. Um uh, but yeah,
And
it just sort of led us down that rabbit hole
right.
of how do you have a
And
real conversation with somebody who's not an expert in the thing that you're building.
right. And I'm curious, you said like, hey, there was like this cold start problem where you kind of just had to
Mm.
like deploy the thing into production and really just see in the wild, how it works. I'm curious, like, do you think the the severity of that cold start problem is the same today? Or do you think with LLMs
No.
and the amount of data we have that it's gotten significantly better?
It's completely the opposite way around,
Okay.
right? So the name Rasa
Hmm.
comes from tabula rasa, meaning like a blank slate, and it was sort of a cute name because it was a machine learning based product, and you're like, You don't
Right.
know anything until you feed it some data and everything else. And like that was true in the first versions of Rasa. Like it
Right.
really didn't know anything, right?
Uh-huh.
And then it came like word embeddings, and then came BERT, and then came these like increasingly good and sophisticated representations
Right.
where you could take something that a user just said to you that you hadn't anticipated and map it in some meaningful way to things that you do know.
Right.
And um, or another way to put that is the model just knows a lot more about language,
Uh-huh.
uh, as the years progress, right? Like out of the box, you know so much more. And now,
Mhm.
of course, I mean I even think about this in terms of our user onboarding. Is it used to be totally the norm that you would start building your AI assistant and on day one it would understand nothing, right?
Mhm.
Maybe like within an hour you could get it to do hello and goodbye, and then you
Right.
were working your way up from there, right? Like adding more, and you start with a blank page and then you start adding functionality. Whereas now, I mean, your starting point is throw the user's query at ChatGPT, and then it starts by being able to do everything, and you have to kind of start to constrain it
Right.
and make it smaller, right? So it's
Yeah.
exactly the opposite problem, right?
Exactly. Interesting.
Yeah, and that
Gotcha.
also sort of changes, of course, completely the expectation of time to value, right? Is
Right.
if you start with a blank page and you like add little bits, people are like, this is crazy. What are you doing?
Yeah.
This is not
Yeah.
of this century, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting that the problem has almost completely flipped to being instead of building, bottom up, you now have like this top down problem, it seems like. You mentioned a little bit about the name of Rasa, which I think
Mm,
is really interesting. I think um if my numbers are correct, you guys have hit like 50 million plus downloads. And I think something that's really interesting to me is kind of your decision to be open source.
mm,
Right. And I think that's something that I would like to talk about a little bit is like why you guys decided to be open source from, so early on, and how that's kind of been important to you guys from the start. I see, a huge, community around you guys. I think was checking out, people self-hosting events, all the way in India and in other
mm.
places. So that's really awesome to see, right? And I think I would love to just hear from you kind of like why that decision came to be, and then also would love to understand kind of what the benefits have been. Have there been any challenges by being open source? And do
Yeah,
you think it was the right decision?
yeah. I mean, very good question. Um, I mean, started innocently enough. We started as a meetup before we had, any idea about what Rasa would be or a product or anything like that.
Mhm.
We just started a developer meetup, and this was like this buzz V1 of chatbots, and everyone being excited about it. And everyone kept saying that they were going to roll their own NLP because everyone
Mhm.
was using these APIs, and no one really trusted that they were going to be free forever. And everyone was building these products, and they're like, I'm totally dependent on this third party for every user interaction. This is pretty sketchy. We're going to roll our own NLP. Like, we don't have time right now, but next month we'll totally do it.
Mhm.
And so everyone kept saying this and not doing it. So we said, okay, well, like we built a pretty decent one. Why don't we open source that and people can
Right.
contribute to that? So it was just the NLP, the language understanding component,
Mhm.
um, that we open sourced. And we just said, like, there were a few APIs at the time that everyone was using, the equivalent of now of like, the LLM providers.
Right.
And we just said, like, here's an open source drop-in replacement that you can just run locally and use yourself, and it's
Right.
free forever and whatever. And
Mhm.
it was just the right product at the right time, right? It was just
Mhm.
total product market fit. It was like 6 months after that initial explosion of buzz around chatbots, and everyone who was still seriously involved with it was like, yeah, I'm ready for something I can
Mhm.
self-host. And so we,
Right.
created a big, uh, you know, a lot of developer affinity and then brand
Right.
around that initially. And
Uh-huh.
then we said, oh, maybe this should be an open source company. So we got intros to every open source founder we could find and
Interesting.
talk to, right? And we talked to like all the big names. And they
Uh-huh.
all said pretty similar thing, right? Like it's a great distribution model and it's a crappy monetization model, which is obviously,
Interesting.
uh,
Right.
a fair point. And I
Yeah.
think there's a reason why the successful open source companies are infrastructure companies
Uh-huh.
and not like applications, right?
Right.
Because I mean, like an end user using an application, what do they care, right? Unless
Yeah.
they're like a diehard fanatic running like some weird Linux distribution, right? Most
Right.
people who are using an application don't really care that much.
Uh-huh.
But people using infrastructure, they get a lot of value from the open sourceness of the infrastructure, right? They
Right.
they want to hack it, and if you're using something like Rasa, which is a framework, at some point you're not going to like one of the assumptions that's baked into it, and you're going
Right.
to want to override that. So you want to like see what it's doing and make
Hmm.
it your own, right? So it's
Hmm.
not even necessarily about sort of freemium or something like that. It's just about knowing like something that's the core of your system.
Hmm.
You want to be able to see and understand and reason about it and modify it and make it your own, right? So that's
Right.
really a key piece. And also, frankly, at the time, wasn't like we could get an outbound sales motion going and saying like, hey, are your developers asking for a better dialogue engine? Because
Yeah.
that was just not a thing that existed or
Yeah.
a category that people knew about, right? If we'd said
Right.
like, yeah, here's a magically smarter like NLP model that's just
Right.
going to boost your accuracy by 5 points, like sure you could sell that, but like
Right.
here's a fundamentally new approach and a whole different paradigm for how you build conversational AI. That was um, that wasn't something that anyone was like shopping around for in the market,
Right.
right? So I think that was, it's funny because I sort of bemoaned for many years that there wasn't really an appetite for new ideas in conversational AI, and everyone was kind of like in this fixed mindset of like you have a classifier, and it
Uh-huh.
classifies what the user says, and then you have a bunch of if statements, and then
Uh-huh.
that's what you do,
Right.
and we were always like trying to push like new ideas, publishing papers, like trying to do,
Those guys are definitely wrong now. I think it's completely
it
different. Yeah.
is. But then, of course, be careful what you wish for because now there's like so much appetite for like new ideas that actually nobody's willing to. It's hard to pin people down on like, we're actually going to do something now, right? There's so much like
Right.
hedging your bets. So as a vendor, as any vendor in this space right now,
Yeah.
everyone's like, oh well, everything might change again in 6 months. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
So it's the exact opposite problem, right? So
Right.
as we had with the technology, but
It's it's super interesting. You said, "Hey, like everything might change in 6 months," and you've been here around like for like 9, 10 years now, basically.
mm,
And so that those 6 month changes, you've been through kind of that cycle. I'm curious, like when all of this, like how do you kind of make your way and build like this enduring one community, like
mm,
this open source really strong community that's always around you, and two, just like an enduring company in this conversational AI space despite it always changing, right? Like I mean, like
yeah.
new technologies are coming in. How do you adapt and still continue to have a lot of your core principles while also adapting some of these new technologies? Is there anything you've done from like a technical perspective that, has set you guys well for kind of adapting to these new things?
Yeah, uh, I think some things have worked in our favor.
Hmm.
I would describe Rasa as a, so far 10-year project to like find the right abstractions for building conversational AI, and I'm sure there's another 10 years to go at least, right? But
Yeah.
we've always thought of it from the perspective of like, well, what are the right Lego bricks? What are actually the building blocks that you need? Whereas
Hmm.
a lot of the platforms that we compete with start from what's the nicest UI experience that's really accessible and intuitive and
Right.
for someone who's not an expert to understand. And when we saw this new crop of language models come out in the last couple of years, it was that okay, well, we have a new breed of models that can do qualitatively different things that we couldn't do before.
Hmm.
And we have a very good understanding of the kinds of things that our customers want to build because, we've got some pedigree and we've got some very big customers running us in production. And we know the kinds of things they want to do. And we know what's been hard for the last 6 or 7 years. We
Hmm.
said, can we just forget everything we know and just redesign from the ground up and then see what drops out of it, right? What can we work backwards? So we started with just a huge list of essentially test cases of like types of conversations that we knew people wanted to be able to build. And we
Right.
said, can we build a small set of abstractions that lets us solve every single one of these problems? And it seemed very daunting at the time, but we just sort of chipped away at it. It came up with something, very simple and small. Well, of course, because of the power of the language models now that we could do it. Um, so the fact that we haven't tried to make it like a batteries included, idiot proof type of experience has
Hmm.
allowed us to innovate a lot faster and has allowed us to, you know, create a kind of choose your own adventure that comes with its own downsides as well, of course, right? And if there are too many different ways to achieve the same thing in your product, that creates complexity and like technical
Right.
debt and all those kinds of things. Um, but it's been really important because we've kind of served, I guess, the sophisticated end of the market.
Right.
That has been an important thing for us to be able to do. And because we have customers where honestly, like teams working with Rasa sometimes it's not a hard requirement, but like sometimes you have 5 or 6 like PhDs
Yeah.
in AI working with Rasa in there who know the product as well as anybody at Rasa knows
Right.
it. So we can give them like really early stuff, and they're going to give us
Yeah.
very,
Good feedback. Yeah.
very smart feedback, and they're going to
Right.
like put it through the ringer, and they're going to give us
Yeah.
cool ideas and like really push us to build something
Right.
better and ask us challenging questions. So
Right.
being thoroughly like in that customer base has really
Wow.
helped us,
Right.
I would say.
And it's interesting you mentioned a few times, like, so like my understanding is that honestly it's been the fact that you have this like open source, infrastructure and not this like bottlenecked, very like specific user experience has allowed you to stay flexible. You also mentioned that, hey, like that has created its own set of challenges, I think in the beginning of your podcast, in the beginning of the podcast, right? Where it's like, hey, like, people don't really use it at the start. They come to us like much later in their cycle, right?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about navigating those challenges and then how you've also been able to land some like really cool customers like, N26, for example, being one of them, and how you kind of have navigated, some of the challenges that exist there with kind of getting these large scale enterprises to adopt you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And like the open source and the developer motion has been so crucial to that,
Mhm.
right? I mean, we work with 3 of the five largest banks in the world use us for
Right.
conversational AI, right? And like all the big players have some
Mhm.
kind of Rasa in there.
Mhm.
Um, and that typically goes because someone, without asking anyone for permission, starts building something with Rasa
Right.
and starts showing like, hey, wait, we can do this, right? And you need that champion to understand it. Like again, it depends on the product and the market that you're in and the problem that you're
Mhm.
solving. But for
Right.
us, empowering someone to use Rasa, show value, and look smart is the best driver we can have for our growth,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
there are other companies that we compete with who, you know, have a totally different playbook, right? And their playbook is to, you know, because they have really tight relationships with all the C-level,
Right.
right? And that's their entry point. That's the reason they get a seat at the table, right? The reason
Right.
we get a seat at the table is because the tech team's like, can we please use Rasa, right? um, but again, that comes with its own challenges because then you have to like work your way up and tell that story and explain that there's more to it than just a little slice of it that the developer has seen, because of course you have the whole sort of enterprisey stuff around it and the platform support and everything else. So you have a wedge in, which is great, but I mean that's not enough to win a big enterprise customer, and certainly not to
Gotcha.
be a sort of a big and this is really what people are looking for now. Is they're not looking for a vendor and a chatbot platform or a voice agent platform. They're
Mhm.
looking for like an innovation partner
Interesting.
because they're hedging their bets.
Yeah.
They're assuming that everything's going to change. They want something with a certain level of flexibility. Like
Right.
nobody wants to hang their hat on like, here's the winning paradigm. Here's how conversational AI is going to get built for the next five
Right.
years, right? Because
Yeah.
again, it's nobody's sticking their neck out to say that right now.
Right. I'm curious, like, what was it like, building for, N26, this really big bank in Europe, and can you kind of like go through that experience of, as you mentioned, being like an innovation partner for them, and one, even getting in the door with them, and then two,
Mm.
like also just like if you're able to share, challenges that you faced when building for them. I know like you had to deploy a bot in I think 5 different languages. Is that correct? And so would just kind of love to understand, some of those things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the one part of the puzzle that's gotten a lot simpler in the last few years is just the amount of conversation ability that these things have out of the box. And
Hmm.
that really does make things a lot simpler because you're not starting from zero. But it's sort of like Red Queen type of scenario because, okay, everything's smarter out of the box, but also expectations have gone through the roof, right?
Yeah.
So now the said problems that people are thinking about has changed.
Hmm.
So 3 4 years ago, you'd be working with one of these teams and they would say, okay, 80/20, we're going to try and look at the top few use cases that are driving a lot of volume,
Right.
and we're going to try and do like a decent job of
Right.
automating those.
Yeah.
And now everyone's confident that like we're going to crush any particular use case that we look at.
Right.
We're going to just absolutely nail it.
Hmm.
How do we cover like the long tail? How do we actually do that? And then you say,
Yeah.
okay, well, historically we've had a team of conversational AI experts that have, you know, been like, building an internal platform on top of some kind of, solution, or maybe we've even built everything in-house. We've
Hmm.
built some, best practices around conversation design and voice, and we've built some standard integrations that are reusable, right? And we've built a lot of like internal investment in this, but now we just need to like churn out use cases by the thousands
Hmm.
because, we just want
Right.
to cover like
Everything.
everything that,
Right.
we want to get full automation, right? 100%. And so then you get a different set of problems, which is okay, well, now we need to like farm out a lot of the work to
Right.
different parts of the enterprise who are not within our expert team of conversational AI experts, right? So how do we
Mhm.
standardize that? So the problem just like shifts elsewhere because the ambitions go up, right? And the
Right.
the level of things that people want to achieve. Um, and I mean, I think one of the other things that's changed is the focus on brag,
Hmm.
where within conversational AI, people talk about this as like you have informational use cases and you have transactional use cases, right?
Yeah.
And informational sort of brag, and transactional is like you're doing something for the user, right? You're calling some APIs, you're like reading and writing some data. It's probably a
Hmm.
multi-step kind of thing. You're really doing something. And there's always been a combination of the two,
Hmm.
right? In voice and in chat to do automation. But like the mental energy was primarily on the transactional stuff.
Hmm.
And FAQs was like, they're FAQs, whatever. But
Hmm.
now because RAG is sort of the hello world of Gen AI and everybody wants to ship Gen AI and tell their boss that they ship Gen AI, so
Hmm.
much of the like mental energy is on the informational stuff, right?
Right.
And so that has also shifted where that is where people start and where people want to start,
Right.
kind of almost irrespective of how much of the volume of traffic it really covers.
Right.
And to be fair, it also actually does cover a substantial amount of traffic, like in a lot of enterprises, right? Is just
Hmm.
people just asking stuff that you can just tell them.
Hmm.
Um, but it changes the entry point, and so it's one of those things where we then have to adapt and think, okay, well, and I mean, this is something we haven't executed on yet particularly well. Is like if you come to Rasa today and you get started, the focus is really primarily on all this like transactional stuff, and then you start to ask about RAG, and it's there, but it's sort of a tier two concern,
Right.
right? And that to a certain audience makes a lot of sense, but to another audience is like, obviously what I want to start with is RAG, and then I don't know what this other stuff is that you're talking about with APIs, but tool calling, I guess we'll get to that
Right.
eventually, right? But let
Yeah.
me let me do some RAG first.
Right.
So that keeps you guessing, that keeps you on your
Right.
toes for sure. And I would say in general, there's just a huge split
Uh-huh.
um, between people who have been working on conversational, like in terms of customers and prospective
Right.
customers, right? The people who are on those teams who have been on those teams since pre-ChatGPT,
Right.
and all the people who have been working on it for the last 18 months and are like experts
Yeah.
in Gen AI, right, or whatever.
Right.
Um, the language they use is different. The set of problems they focus on is different. The
Right.
metrics they think about are different. Um, and so as any vendor that's in the space, you kind of trying to keep a foot in two different worlds and trying to speak to
Right.
two different audiences, and
Yeah.
that's an interesting challenge as well, right, for any
Interesting.
startup.
And see, you mentioned like, hey, a lot of people are starting like RAG first and kind of going into these like maybe like harder challenges from the get go. You mentioned like I remember reading this like blog post from you about like 5 levels of conversational
Yeah,
AI, right?
yeah.
I'm kind of curious. I think I forget when exactly it was published, but it was maybe a little bit ago. I'm kind of curious.
2020.
Yeah, 2020. I'm kind of curious, like,
Hmm.
how do you view those 5 levels as still the same? Do you think it's changed? Where do you think we are like right now?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and yeah, which level do you maybe think we are at right now? And yeah, where do you think we can be? And maybe just for, listeners who maybe haven't read it, if you could just quickly summarize, the 5 levels
yeah,
as well.
yeah. Sure. And it's funny, it's great timing that you asked me that because I'm giving a talk about it tomorrow. So
Oh,
it gives
perfect.
me a
There you
chance to practice
go.
practice the talk track.
There you go.
Because I was like digging that thing up and I was like,
Mhm.
do I still believe this? Is this still relevant?
Mhm.
I don't know. So I had to reread it myself. But
Right.
so it's a maturity model for conversational AI, 5 levels, right? This was at the time the big thing was like 5 levels of autonomous driving, right? And
Mhm.
like level 5 is like you take a nap in the back of the car and like you arrive
Right.
when you arrive, right? And that was
Yeah.
I love that because it was so visceral and intuitive, and anyone could relate to
You
that and
can
say like
kind of
that's
do
what I
you
want.
can do that now. Like you can sit in the back of a Waymo and you're kind of
True,
good.
that's true, that's true. Um, yeah, so maybe we're there, right? It's just not evenly distributed.
Yeah.
But uh, but yeah, so that was a way of framing that these chatbots that could only live in the happy path and broke as soon as you went off the happy path, that was level 2. And what we were trying to build at the time and evangelize and position was like level 3. Like, how do you build something that can handle some of the complexity of real user behavior and things going kind of off the rails, but still keep focused on the goal?
Mhm.
I think we leapfrog now to like level 4,
Mhm.
and uh, and level 4 is all about not just being able to stray from the happy path, but people really describing something in their own terms.
Right.
And somebody comes in and says, "You messed up my order,"
Mhm.
right? And like, if you're building an application, you're like, okay, well, is it a disambiguation thing? Because maybe there's something missing. Maybe they didn't like what they got. Maybe it's late. Maybe it's damaged. Who knows? Um, but it's not. We think of that, but it's not disambiguation, right? What the person said is perfectly clear. You
Mhm.
messed up their order, right? That's their world, that's their reality. You just need to figure out how to map it to your system.
Mhm.
And so that was sort of the definition of level 4, is that people don't have to come in articulating what their problem is in your terms. You can
Right.
help them find out, right? And then level 5 got to the point of adapting in real time in the conversation to a particular user. So the example I gave is if somebody comes in and is clearly very knowledgeable about a topic, that you're going to treat them differently to someone who is asking something very basic, or using all this sort of contextual profile information you might have about this user.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of holds up. And that point that I was talking about yesterday, and this is kind of the thesis of the talk I'm giving tomorrow, is the like one technical pillar has really been solved to deliver that level 5 AI. Like if you can do all the context engineering, this is the shortest version of the talk.
Mhm.
If you can do all the context engineering, then like frontier models now are smart enough to do that personalization in real time for the right user. But
Right.
how on earth, if you're a large enterprise, with 200,000 employees and all these different departments and everything
Yeah.
else, are you going to build a system that can do context engineering at
This-
that scale for that level of user and that
Right.
level of personalization, right? So,
Yeah.
so the area of difficulty has shifted, and we have something that makes it a lot more possible. And the difference as well is like the belief is there at the
Right.
C level. The belief is there, right? So if you want to share context between, um, you know, somebody does something in the app
Right.
and then if they get stuck and then they call up for help, that when they call up, you already know what they were just trying in the app, right?
Yeah.
Always theoretically possible. In reality, in a large company, very difficult thing to achieve politically, to like force these people to, make sure that the
Right.
right data goes in the right place at the right time. But
Uh-huh.
now the C-suite are like, we're doing AI, we're doing it for real, go do it. Like they're looking
Yeah.
at their leaders and they're like, make it happen, right?
Interesting.
Find a way to make it
Yeah.
happen. And that's great. And it's generally true for voice, I would say. So,
Right.
voice doing true sort of telephony automation, right? Like
Right.
people's like contact number, that is a high prestige, highly political thing in an enterprise, right? Who gets to
Yeah.
be there? Who gets to be there when that phone rings?
Right.
um and there's a lot of like internal posturing of like whose project gets to take that over.
Right.
um and but the it was really, if you wanted to do full like AI in there, not just like some routing to the right agent, but like really end to end, like automating a thing in there. That was really like not for the faint of heart. And obviously, again, like some of the pieces have gotten a lot easier now.
Mhm.
But the big thing that's changed is this: the C-suite saying like, figure it out, go
Yeah.
and do it. Right.
Yeah.
I believe this is possible now.
Right.
Make it happen for
Make it.
me.
Yeah.
Right. Um,
Yeah.
And that's obviously great for us because I mean, there's so many interesting problems to solve around building
Right.
a good and interesting and compelling, automated voice AI
Right.
that are not trivial.
Right.
That it's more than just like calling an LLM API and like slapping a speech recognizer and a speech synthesizer on the other end.
Right. And
Yeah.
so I think it's kind of perfect that you started talking about voice because that was like the next question I was going to ask you is like, hey, you guys
Yeah.
started out with this like chat-based interface. When was the moment that you realized like, hey, like, we need to go into voice and really just make it, a really great experience is kind of
Mhm.
like one question that I have. And then the second question I have is as people like obviously like, voice AI right now is, very buzzy, like a lot of people are building in it. There's a lot of new
Yeah.
applications coming around. Do you
Yeah.
think do you think things will get fully automated through voice or will that chat modality always be around? Do you see customers wanting both of them or are they trying to make the full pivot to voice? And how do you think these kind of modalities will play around with each other?
I think it's a bit of a tail wagging the dog argument that you
Mhm.
hear in Silicon Valley, as if these companies get to choose how customers contact them, right? Like they
Mhm.
don't. I think they would have pushed everyone to chat 10 years ago if they could have, but people pick
Mhm.
up the phone and they call and you have to deal with it,
Call.
right?
Right.
Like it's been cheaper to deal with chat for like some time. So if they
Yeah.
would have had the option, they would have put because like one agent can handle a bunch of chats in parallel and they can't handle a
Mhm.
bunch of calls in parallel. So,
Mhm.
the math just works out that way, right? So
Right.
um uh, I mean, you can build. I think they're the ambitious product teams will build really interesting experiences that mix being on the phone and then seeing something in the browser or seeing something in
Yeah.
the app to like confirm and these sort of like interesting multimodal experiences. But again, like only really strong engineering organizations will pull that off purely because not because it's like that technically challenging, but just because of the engineering overhead of and the political overhead of like making all of that unified, right? And
Mhm.
making those things like talk to each other in a real way. Um, so but I think that's there. That's going
Mhm.
to happen.
Right.
Um, I think that there's so much interesting stuff to build on building a really good, natural, low latency voice experience.
Mhm.
So the way that we used to treat voice was, Rasa pretended everything was text, right? And
Mhm.
like dealing with audio was just outside of Rasa. And once you had it transcribed, we would deal with it. And then, we would send you some text that you could synthesize. Although a lot of the time you could just cache that because there were canned responses anyway. So it's not like you have to regenerate it every time. Um, so that's how it used to work. And it was really only the ambitious teams who wanted to do it and take it on.
Mhm.
Um, but then when we sort of built this new architecture of Rasa, the following year, our goal was really, in 2024. So we released it in 2023. 2024, we said, like, let's prove that large enterprises can run this in production, right? Let's prove
Right.
that we can get like an LLM native version of Rasa in production in these like very large, very conservative
Right.
companies.
Mhm.
And that was our target last year, right? And our main company target was like, how many of these, you know,
Can
enterprise
you do?
things can we get moved over to full LLMs? And
Mhm.
then this year, the target's been, can we do the same with voice? So like the new
Right.
architecture, fully LLM native, can
Right.
we do it with
With
sub-second
voice. Yeah.
latency? And that's been a great, a great uh, effort. I mean, obviously, we started the engineering side of it over
Right.
12 months ago to start to like really get ready for it and everything else. But one of the
Yeah.
unique things about Rasa is um, the way that we leverage LLMs, we don't initially at least produce the final answer that gets sent to the user. We
Interesting.
produce like an internal language that we use to progress the conversation, um, that sort of represents like how the user wants to progress.
Right.
And one, that's just a couple tokens, but two, because it's this very specified task, you can do a very nice model distillation.
Right.
So, we can work with customers and they can take a frontier model and they
Mhm.
can match or even exceed the accuracy of a frontier model with something they can run on one GPU, something they can run and get like the last token in 200 milliseconds,
Mhm.
really, really, really fast and
Mhm.
cheap. Right? Not to mention, cost is a big factor as well.
Right.
Um, so that's been a great sort of journey working with folks who really want to push the frontier of what's possible.
Right.
And so, we recently had a case study go live with Swisscom. They
Awesome.
run us, in production in 4 different languages with their voice assistant.
Right.
Like it's a very advanced system. It's very cool. And
How have you
um,
built up trust with all of these like enterprises like going into I mean
mm,
like I see like, oh, like pilots always failing, like people being
Mm,
apprehensive. It seems like you almost have like the entire opposite experience where like people are maybe willing to adopt it really quickly. Like, what has been the mechanism for you to drive trust for initial adoption, but then also
yeah.
continued usage of Rasa, over time, especially with, these new voice-based frameworks?
Yeah. I mean, I hesitate to recommend this to anyone else, but we really don't bullshit anyone. And
Okay.
that really cuts both ways, right? Like
Mhm.
on the one hand, being really forthright about like what works and what doesn't, and speaking in concrete terms about what the trade-offs are, it builds a lot of credibility
Mhm.
with the kinds of customers that are going to ultimately be successful. The ones who
Right.
want the hard truths, who want to like work with you, and the ones who want to look at your code and decide for themselves,
Yeah.
right, what the right solution is, who really want a thought partner that they're gonna, work with.
Mhm.
There's another play where you just like promise the world and hope afterwards that you can make it work, or just throw people at the problem and hope that hope that you can duct tape over any of the issues, or
Yeah.
whatever else it might be.
Uh-huh.
That's a play that a lot of people go for, and there's a certain type of executive buyer who resonates well with that, right? It's not been
Right.
our play, it's not authentic to us.
Yeah.
But for the folks that pick Rasa, it's often the case that they're like, yeah, we talk to so many vendors, but you have so much more credibility because you're talking to us about what's real, and you're not, just vaguely promising or hiding how the technology works behind some, hand wavy stuff or a UI or something like that. You're letting us see how it works and everything. So,
Interesting. Okay, cool. I think we have like 5-ish minutes left. Want to understand kind of one final question, then we'll go into some rapid fire, like more lighthearted questions.
all right.
Um, so today, obviously, Rasa, as you mentioned, is like, this strong open source community, a lot of developers. You guys are crushing it in the enterprise world. Been around for 9 years, have been kind of doing this and really just excelling. I'm kind of curious, like looking now to the next 5 years or the next 10
Mm,
years, as this space, obviously there's a lot of, conversational AI platforms that are, popping up every day. I think a new one gets funded every day. How do you think that Rasa will maintain, kind of the strength that you guys currently have? And do you think that winners in this space will be more open source rather than closed? And what's your kind of reasoning behind that? Or what
yeah.
factors in general do you think will kind of determine success?
Yeah. I mean, there are also great parallels with previous chapters in the space, because there were also like thousands of conversational AI platforms,
Right.
6 or 7 years ago, and there's been a consolidation, obviously, and a
Right.
pruning, as it were. Um, Again, our approach has always been find the right primitives, find the right things that are actually going to, compose together well, and build a piece of infrastructure that people want to build on, and build
Mhm.
something that is future proof, and it doesn't hang its hat on one particular abstraction or one particular idea of how to build something.
Mhm.
Um, and continuing to really think ahead and solve the hard problems. And that's feedback we've had from our customers, is that with so many vendors, we work with them and we give them some feedback about what we want, and they come back and they implement what we asked for, but it was what we asked for, but not what we really needed, right? Like Raz always comes back and asks an annoying amount of questions and comes out with some prototypes, and then actually, comes back with the solution to the sort of underlying problem
Mhm.
that was really the thing that we needed, right? But I mean, I don't think there's a one size fits all, right? That's our niche. That's how we play. That's how we compete, and we serve the sophisticated end of the market, right? So like in the chasm, view of the world, right? Like the innovators and the early adopters. That's really the people who like Rasa and who use Rasa.
Right.
There's a totally different kind of enterprise who are like, they love the pitch of like, just give us the keys and we'll take care of it for you,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that, and that's totally fine. And there's some companies like that right now in our market who are doing very well, and like, great, good for
Yeah.
them, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I don't think there's a single sort of winning play in
Right.
the enterprise, because they just have um,
Boom.
different wants and needs. But
Right.
the other way I think about it, and we talk about it as a team, I just like shamelessly, rip off Jeff Bezos. I'm like, let's ask what's not going to change, right?
Right.
And like enterprises are going to be complex organizations. They're going to have like a large amount of customers asking about like a large amount of use cases,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just, slapping MCP on top of all your APIs and throwing an LLM at it does not solve that problem, right? So like
Yeah.
let's go figure out what does solve that problem. Right? How do we really do that,
Yeah.
and how do we deal with it from it's a technology problem, but it's also a people and an organization problem.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, cool. I like to try to end these things with just some like rapid fire questions. So these are more
Yep,
like not as serious. Feel free to answer the first thing that comes to your mind.
sure.
So yeah, we'll just kind of kick it off. Um, what's kind of like the most underrated concept in conversational AI that you think, or voice AI that you think deserves like a lot more attention?
Writing down business logic in explicit code that runs correctly every time, as opposed to
Gotcha.
laundering it through an LLM and hoping that it still comes out correctly at the other end.
Um, yeah, makes sense. What's one like misconception about LLMs or AI assistants that you wish, more people understood correctly?
Oof, just one. Uh, I think, yeah, I think I would still say like look at your data
Uh-huh.
and I know you think about evals and you care about evals and like LM is a judge, sure, but that's an automation that you can implement once you've done an awful lot of looking at your data.
Right.
And it's a non-negotiable. And it was a non-negotiable when everything was like supervised classifiers, and it's a
Mhm.
non-negotiable now that we have LLMs. Like
Right.
there is no substitute for a human looking at some conversations with end users and using their judgment to say, was this good? Was this
Interesting. Cool. Super cool. Final question here. If this one's completely out of the blue, if Rasa, your company or product had like a spirit animal, what would that animal be and why?
the elephant?
The elephant?
The elephant, yeah.
What's the reasoning behind that?
I mean, long memory,
Hmm.
survivors, dependable,
Yeah.
uh, credible. Yeah, I think it's got to be the elephant.
We there was the right answer was Bluejay. That's what we were looking for.
All right. I don't know anything about Blue Jays, so other than they're presumably blue. So,
Yeah.
what
Well,
what's the inspiration? What's the metaphor? Why
yeah.
Blue Jay?
Yeah, I was actually when I was at AWS, we were working a lot with canaries, and so these were like
Mm.
essentially things that ran on people's software consistently throughout the day. And I was kind of thinking about something similar for voice agents and chat agents, right? If you could have this like simulated software that kind of just was health checking your AI throughout the day. And that's kind of when I started looking into like different birds. I just really liked Blue Jay as a name and kind of landed on that. We later
Cool.
found out that Blue Jays also sometimes like fight each other. And so similar to how, Blue
Mm.
Jays simulation agents fight other people's agents, it kind of has like a good parity with like Blue Jays themselves. And then when we threw it into, GPT and we saw the logo, we just kind of like, we're okay, like this is it.
I
So
like it.
that's kind of how we landed on that.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, I think that's mainly all the time we have for today. Really appreciate you, hopping on here, sharing a lot about your story, some of the challenges that you faced at Rasa, and some of the successes that you guys have also had. To wrap things up, anything you'd like to, shout out about the company, or let people know?
Yeah. If you're serious about doing voice and you want to do it, you know, dependably, low latency, you want a partner that's there with you for the long haul, come talk to us.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Alan, once again for hopping on. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Rohan. Nice chat.